All right, so up next, I'm pleased to introduce Jim Sullivan. He's the Deputy Assistant for Services at the International Trade Association of the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's through Jim's support that in the work of his team that the Chamber of Digital Commerce was able to lead the first ever blockchain certified trade mission last October, where we went to the United Arab Emirates. This trade mission included a delegation of chamber members, including representatives from Block, Cisco, CMT Digital, Cognizant, Jim, Hogan Lovells, Netkey, and several others. A key part of this trip and mission was focused on increasing U.S.-based companies' presence in the UAE and to help collaborate on implementing the Dubai blockchain strategy, which is a vision to make Dubai the first blockchain-powered government in the world by the year 2020. So it was a really special opportunity for us to get to go out and work with the Smart Dubai office, learn more about this, and also bring some of our companies to serve as a resource to the Dubai blockchain strategy. And then later in the year, we took a second trip to the Monetary Authority of Singapore's FinTech Festival last November to learn about Project Ubin, which is a project by the Central Bank of Singapore to tokenize the Singaporean dollar using blockchain technology. So we just heard from Jihan about private central banking. There are efforts around the world, including in Singapore, where using government fiat money, tokenizing those using blockchain technology and distributed ledger technology. So it's fascinating to see how these two worlds are coming together. Jim's team in Singapore, the UAE, and in Washington, D.C. have been incredibly accommodating, but also strategic in working with the Chamber and our members in the way that we interact with government and industry and key geographies where we're seeing just a hub of innovation and growth in the blockchain sector. In addition, just a few weeks ago, Amy and I had the opportunity to speak to over 300 staff at the International Trade Administration, their staff from around the world, about blockchain and its benefits. So we've been working very closely with Jim and his team to help educate as many people as possible throughout the U.S. Department of Commerce and ITA on blockchain technology, so they can then utilize this in their jobs and in their roles. We could not have done any of this without Jim's support, so I'm really pleased that he is here today. Please help me in welcoming the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Jim Sullivan.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Perry Ann, thank you for the introduction. It is, as always, a pleasure for me to be back at Georgetown. I was here, I don't want to say how many years ago. Let's just say I was in the car barn when I got my MBA. But I am delighted to be back. I'm delighted to be here on this particular issue. I do want to thank the Chamber and Georgetown for hosting me. At a high level, I'm sure everyone appreciates this to some degree. The mission of the Commerce Department is basically to foster and promote foreign and domestic commerce for the United States. In my role as the Assistant Secretary for Services, my particular focus is to help create the conditions for U.S. services industries to innovate and compete globally. Now, services obviously includes an expanding range of economic activities, from architecture, engineering, construction, to computer and ICT services, e-commerce, express delivery, financial services, professional services, including legal and accounting, retail, wholesaling, transportation, tourism, and a whole host of others. Services do account for a majority of the U.S. economy. They're about 78% of our GDP and over 82%, I believe, of private sector employment. But services not only function as end-use products, they also facilitate virtually every other sector of the economy, both the U.S. economy and the global economy. For example, financial services. They provide the credit for the manufacture, the production of products, goods, crops, transportation services. Obviously, they move products along global supply chains to the end customer, and digital services. They enable the data transfers that increasingly underpin literally all economic activity around the globe these days. So over the last 20 years, the so-called digitization of everything has transformed and enriched these global flows of finance, goods, and data. They've basically helped to reduce costs, to enable businesses to drive growth and innovation, and they've opened the doors to much greater participation by individuals and entrepreneurs in the global economy. We at Commerce have engaged regularly with our foreign counterparts to address foreign government actions and policies that impede these particular categories of flows and at times do create barriers both to innovation and competition for U.S. exporters. So that's the last 20 years. But today, obviously, we all hear the claim that blockchain is again going to revolutionize business and redefine entire industries and economies. We hear it characterized as disruptive in some quarters, transformative in other quarters, and foundational in yet other quarters. I think most, if not all people here probably share the enthusiasm for blockchain's potential. I'm sure there's some level of disparity about the level of concern about hype around blockchain. So our goal right now at Commerce is to keep pace with the developments in the DLT space, to better understand its implications for the global flows that I mentioned, for finance, goods, and data, and for the competitiveness of U.S. exporters in our obviously increasingly digitalized global economy. So how do we do that at Commerce? How do we stay current and up to date on the various implications of the technology? On this particular issue and many others, government's most salient power is really the power to convene. Given the number, complexity, in some cases divisiveness of the issues that surround DLT and blockchain, public-private collaboration is absolutely critical. It allows those of us in government to leverage private sector innovation and expertise and then integrate it in our mission to serve the public interest. So over the last several months, my office, which sits within the International Trade Administration, the Commerce Department, has focused on collaborating with private and public sector stakeholders in three core areas with respect to blockchain. First and foremost, we've sought out guidance to better understand blockchain's technical aspects and its policy implications, sort of at a high level. We're collaborating with one of our sister agencies at the Commerce Department, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to build on their great work in this space. As many of you may know, NIST, as it's called, did release a high-level technical report on blockchain last month. Their goal there was to sort of clarify the subject for U.S. companies that want to make clear-eyed decisions about whether blockchain would in fact be an asset to their business model. We've also worked, as we heard earlier, directly with the Chamber of Digital Commerce on trade missions, and that's point there was to bring innovative U.S. fintech firms to foreign markets, and we participated in what I understand was a very successful mission to Dubai last fall. Now, last month, as Perry-Ann just mentioned, she and her colleague Amy Kim joined us at Commerce, along with about 300 trade specialists and commercial service officers, both in DC and from around the globe, to brief us on blockchain technology, sort of outlining its uses, its benefits, and its limitations. Among other things, our team has partnered with the Singapore Monetary Authority to promote and recruit top-notch U.S. delegations to the Singapore FinTech Festival, which is the premier conference in this space. I'm sure some of you may have attended either last year or the year before. So that's sort of a sampling of the first area that we're focused on in terms of convening and collaborating with various stakeholders. The second primary area is really on researching blockchain's potential to help shape international trade. And specific to that, I'm talking about making trade finance more available to U.S. exporters and the buyers of their goods, and U.S. supply chains, making them more efficient for U.S. exports. I think I'm going to cut parts of my speech. I was looking earlier at the list and the agenda and the speakers, and obviously there's a great many experts who are going to touch on some of these issues. I know there are several consortiums already focusing on how blockchain will transform and streamline trade finance. I'll just make the point, since we deal with both the providers of trade finance and the recipients, daily, if not weekly. Without it, it's virtually impossible for U.S. exporters to sell more of their products and services globally. That lack of finance options has ramifications. It limits the country's overall economic growth, the creation of jobs, and particularly good-paying jobs in many instances. The companies that are usually hit hardest by this by this gap, I should say, of trade finance are small and medium-sized businesses. They're the ones, as you well know, who usually don't have the resources to begin with or a track record. And according to the stats we pulled, they are typically rejected by financial institutions about 60% of the time, compared to about 10% of the time for multinational requests for trade finance. So we think this is where blockchain could come in by allowing, for example, for the digitization of contracts and other paperwork, and by granting secure digital identities to the goods themselves, eliminating or at least accurately detecting performance risk. So my boss, the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, recently met with and asked the Trade Finance Advisory Council, they advise him on trade finance issues, he asked them to look specifically at technologies like blockchain and how they can help streamline trade finance and expand access to the finance for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and others. So we're looking forward to getting some recommendations and input there and acting on those recommendations in the near future. With respect to supply chain, it's probably fairly self-evident to this group. It can really help optimize the transactions along the way. I mean, at every point, from the factory to the truck to the rail to the ships, there's paperwork involved, and if we could get smart contracts, as many are currently experimenting with, it would really streamline and increase the efficiencies of our supply chains. To be able to track, for example, someone was telling me the other day, a bottle of milk, knowing which cow it was milked from, at which farm, at what time of day, the entire history of the cow, and every second along the way of the supply chain, so that at the end, when the consumer buys that, there's absolute confidence that they've been able to track where it is, where it's come from, that it's safe, et cetera. So that is another area we're focused on, and we're meeting quite a bit with a number of stakeholders, primarily in the industry, whether it's the shippers, the truckers, the cargo container manufacturers, et cetera, to understand how we can really increase efficiencies and make supply chains vastly more efficient than they are right now. The third area that we're really focused on, which is just getting underway since the White House just recently announced its infrastructure initiative, relates to how we can use blockchain in that space. We've just started some conversations, but we do see a potential to reshape, for example, how we distribute critical commodities like energy and water, and consequently how we think about the systems that support them. So again, we're just at the outset here on this issue, but we look forward to getting into it deeper and to see what blockchain might be able to do in that space. So again, I don't want to talk on issues where I know you have some very deep expertise coming up behind me, but I will close by saying, again, one of the best things we can do in government is convene and collaborate. We have the power to bring different parties together, to hear what the issues are, to hear what their recommendations are, and to try to come up with consensus as to the best way to approach those problems. Obviously, there's always going to be different views, different priorities, depending on where you sit. We cannot make policy in the abstract. That's obviously a very bad idea. So I would welcome all of you in the audience who have an interest to reach out. We'd be more than happy to sit down and talk about what the issues and problems are that you may be facing, and to hear your recommendations as to how to address them. Policy is a messy process, but you need to have your hand in if you want to affect it. So again, I'd invite everyone to reach out. I'm more than happy to sit down and meet with folks. We do think there's a lot of opportunity and potential in this space with this technology. Obviously, it touches on a lot of the core issues we deal with in my office. So I look forward to talking. I will be here for the remainder of the afternoon, so again, please do reach out and let us know. The more we know, the better the policy is. So thank you again for the invitation to be here, and thank you all for your attention.